Welcome to the Reasons to Reason podcast. I'm your host and captain, Sal Galati. This is the show that's going to talk about all the things we're not supposed to: God, religion, and politics. So strap in, prepare to get offended, and maybe, just maybe, our nation can learn how to reason again. Thanks for joining us for another episode. You are listening to the 1-year anniversary show of the Reasons to Reason podcast. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for sharing the show with friends. Continue to share it, review it, like it, subscribe to it on all platforms. The show's grown immensely in a year, and it's been a lot of fun to do. I've learned a lot, and today's show, a week late actually, because the anniversary was 11/18, but it's still something I wanted to do, and I wanted to go through briefly over all the shows, the founding of the show, and if you're new to the show, then you can kind of take a look back through the year. Some of the episodes are about current events, so they kind of have come and gone. I think still very interesting. A lot of them, though, are just ideas I've put together over the years. You know, I tell people all the time, if I heard someone else putting together somebody's concepts the way I'm doing it, I wouldn't waste my time. I really think I'm trying to do something original here, tying in the Bible, tying in philosophy, history, politics, current events, and packaging it in a way where you could see the truth of God's word kind of piercing through all of it. I started the show, honestly, because people over and over and over were telling me I should have a podcast. And people I trusted, people I respected. So I decided to do it, and I'm having a lot of fun doing it. So the first episode was called, and honestly, in hindsight, a couple things. I didn't have a good mic, so the first 4 or 5 episodes, the audio is not as good as I would hope. A friend then gave me one. And then I tried to pack too much into each episode because I was so excited. And I didn't think, just take some time and sparse it out. So the first episode really should have just been like a trailer introducing the show. And then the meat of the show, which was George Washington's farewell address. And I go through it, and I kind of just talk about insights he had and wisdom he had and how it's playing out into modern times. It's really interesting. It's like a document that should be studied and read, but no one even talks about. The next one was a Thanksgiving Day episode, and I called it Setting Up Stones, and really talking about holidays and how they're meant and their intention was to memorialize very special occasions. And that the original intention of the day of Thanksgiving was an acknowledgement of God and His sovereign power, and that Washington knew that without God's intervention, there was no way that these rebels would have been able to beat off the English and have a nation. And so he designated a day of thanks, and I kind of talk about how now it's called like Turkey Day, for example, and we completely marginalized it and made it just something about eating a lot of food, watching football, and partying. And that's not at all what it was. And then I talk about biblically, like God asks us to set up monuments and stones so we won't forget. Because within a generation, the kids forget if you don't remind them. Marx's Life versus Jesus' Truth. I go through the ideology of Marxism and then compare it to the gospel. And I think there's a lot of similarity there in the ultimate goal of what you accomplish, which is a society that is selfless, without want, and everyone has what they need. But we go through Marx's way of doing it, which leads to death and destruction because it doesn't address the sinful nature of man's heart, versus Jesus' method of doing it, which is by showing love, offering a way to be forgiven and made new into an actually selfish creature, where Marx said, I will make the new selfless Soviet man. Christ says, I will give my life for you to be forgiven. Follow me. This show is officially sponsored by American Rose Coffee. They're not just a coffee company. They're about fueling bold ideas and real conversations. Every roast is crafted for people who think deeply, challenge the norm, and live with purpose. If you want coffee that matches that mindset, head to AmericanRoseCoffee.com. That's American Rose Coffee. Bold coffee, bold conversations. Signs everywhere sign. That's one of the founding ideas of the show. I go through all the yard signs in people's yards. Hate has no home here. Love is love. And I kind of unpack them for what they really are saying. And I find that to be a really interesting one. Discussing the Bible with a skeptic. This is a conversation I had with a friend. Probably too long. It was an hour-long episode. But we just talked to common, discreditations of the Bible and, the answers that are provided. What does the Bible actually say? What doesn't it say? Mafia and politics was one that did really well, and it was comparing modern-day politics to the mafia and how it operates, and even governmental agencies that started off with good intentions, like the CDC or the FDA, how because of money and greed, they've been corrupted. And really it was the mafia, similarly in its infancy, was really set up with good intentions, but because of money and greed, it ultimately served the wrong God, and it led to bad results. Autism, what is going on, conversation with friend I made talking about autism. That was from December 21st, 2024. Now, some of these things are maybe coming to light as to what is behind this rampant increase in autism. It cannot be genetics. The genetics don't explain how you go from something that was very rare to almost a kid on every block now in our neighborhoods has autism. Christ is greater than Christmas. I go through the Christmas story and I unpack kind of modern day Christmas and the traditions and where they come from, how they have nothing to do with Jesus, how biblically speaking we have no evidence of when Jesus was born, but we could deduce that it was probably in the fall, not December 25th. So just talking about kind of historically what's going on there in a biblical view of Jesus' birth. Prophetic vision fulfilled. That was an episode I went through an interview with Yuri Bezmenov, who was a Soviet defector from 1984, and just a chilling interview where he goes through what he saw happening in our country and how we actually see it manifest today. Homeschool is an option. That was an interview we did with Jen Burns, who started a homeschool co-op program about 25 years ago and is opening up more campuses, has become a model for a homeschool hybrid where you have in-class instruction twice a week and then homeschool the rest of the week. And it's something we participate in, our family participates in, we've been blessed by. So we just did an interview kind of laying that out. Debating money, politics, and God with a friend. That was a two-parter I did with a friend, and we discussed all those topics, and I hope you find it interesting. Slavery to Freedom was a testimony of a friend I've made who shared his radical transformation from being an addict to being a believer in Christ and what that all was and what it meant to him. A fake pastor, I go through a letter I wrote during the Black Lives Matter movement, and local pastor that is obviously not interested in what God has to say, but is just a political activist masquerading as someone who is disseminating God's word. And just that's something we got to deal with and recognize, right? Not everyone who speaks on God's behalf is truly doing that. We have to look at God's word. What does he say? And, you have a problem with that, that's fine. You have a problem with what God says, not what any individual says. Religious freedoms, COVID firings, went through some legal cases of people getting fired because of them not wanting to take the vaccine. EPA going green, making green, point out kind of the hypocrisy of some of these environmental policies that are not really about helping the planet and based on garbage science, and actually people doing good things that are helping the environment get no funding because there's no money in it. Greatest Trick the Devil Ever Played was an episode I did with a friend who works for the FBI and talking about some of the online stuff going on and how it's preying on children in really bad ways. And I mean, the only conclusion we got to is like it has to be demonic. Out of the Mouth of Babes was a conversation I had with a bunch of kids, mine included, where we just let them ask kind of the questions that kids ask and are serious questions, but a lot of adults don't have the insight to answer them truthfully, so they lie to them, and it could hurt kids. But the kids ask big questions, and there are big answers offered in the Bible. Experts, modern-day false prophets. I kind of show the correlation between self-proclaimed experts in our society and the false prophets of the Bible, or the false prophets that are still around today, and how the false prophets really just said what the political leadership wanted them to say. They weren't interested in what God had to say. Whereas the real prophets were actually pushed out of society, demeaned, harassed. They didn't like what they had to say. Similarly to maybe some of the experts that have been canceled or deplatformed because they didn't go with the narrative, even though they were right. Protecting the kids, this is when I started doing a Dose of Reasons, little shorter episodes. And this was highlighting a conversation I had with people from the library board and kind of their decision-making and putting certain books in a kids section that probably didn't belong there. Measles Madness going viral. I talk about the hysteria and how, even in the local school circulations of emails, how they like pinpoint anytime someone who's unvaccinated gets sick, they make it a huge story. And they obfuscate the truth as to why people are sick and vaccination status and what it matters. The Signal app fiasco, I talked about, it's a long story, long gone, but early in the Trump administration, there was a big thing because they used Signal app to disclose some military information. I just talk it's just all nonsense. The homeschool bill, failed politicians blaming homeschool families. Legislation that was trying to get passed in Illinois that had no benefit other than just attacking and harassing homeschool families while they ignored the failure of their public education system. Fleeing Marxism, The Seeking Truth, interview with a Ukrainian immigrant and his dealings with Marxism, and now his coming to the realization that Jesus is Lord. And I'm excited for him. Tariff trepidation, don't chase the ball. This was all the tariff talks early on, and all the scare and all the sizzle, rampant inflation. It's, and turns out we don't have the inflation that we were promised, which I called back in April 7. PBS and NPR, modern day Pravda propaganda. I go through how these networks are state-funded media that push the state narrative, the government narrative, and it's no different than Pravda had in Soviet Russia. And interestingly enough, finally, our government stopped funding them to the extent that they do. And it was not unbiased coverage. It was hyper-politicized, both PBS and NPR. And the state does not need to fund a media channel. We have the private media companies can do that. Considering the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, that was one I did with a friend that has come to faith and has been baptized since. He was a fan of the show through another friend, called up, we started talking, and gave him a book to read, Case for Christ, and he did essentially a book review of it, and the most compelling evidence that Jesus, in fact, did rise from the dead, as hard as that is to believe. Discussing the Passover with Michael Savage. Michael Savage is a radio personality I listened to since I was a kid. Always insightful, not always right, sometimes controversial, but always seeing forward. And I posted I don't have much Twitter or whatever, but I posted my show on his Twitter feed, and then he blocked me. So, which is like par for the course for this guy's personality. But anyway, I know someone that knows him, kinda. So I asked him to share this episode with him, and I essentially have a conversation with him. He's talked about Jesus in the past. He's of Jewish heritage, and he's got fond commentary on Jesus and valued his teaching. But he misses the boat as far as you don't have to give up your Judaism for whatever that means to be a follower of Jesus. And I just wanted to correct some misinterpretations I've heard him say. And hopefully he listened to it. And I don't know if he did or not, but that was a conversation I had with him discussing the Passover. The Father's love and adoption story. This was a conversation I had with a friend that tells his testimony, and also a testimony of coming to faith in Jesus, and also his story of being adopted from Ethiopia. And it was a compelling story, and he shares some amazing visions he had from the Lord. Unrestricted Warfare, Wake Up America. I go through a book that was written by the Chinese, kind of describing how they were going to go to war with us over the years, and not kinetic warfare. There's many types of warfare, whether it's bringing drugs into our country, taking our jobs, propaganda, infiltrating our education system, causing social division via social media. All the things that we're experiencing, whether it's economic, information, cyber, psychological, cultural, biological, it's all laid out in their book, and now it's happening, and I'm just saying, guys, wake up. They told us what they're going to do, and they're doing it. AI in the end times. AI is a big thing right now. This is back in May, and I did a few episodes on AI, but AI in the end times, I kind of describe biblical revelation of the end times and how AI could easily find its role in it. And, amazing that this revelation was provided 2,000 years ago, and we're seeing some things come to pass that we could never have imagined. Making money on the homeless, conversation with someone, a friend that has experience dealing with homeless and addressing homelessness, and just the corruption that's involved in it, that it's completely been made a business, kind of ties into mafia and politics. There's money being made on people being homeless, and that's why it's not getting resolved, even though a ton of money's spent on it. ChatGPT believes in God, a two-parter I did with a professor that had a conversation with ChatGPT, and through logic and reason arrived at the conclusion that God is both the creator and sustainer of the universe, the God of the Bible, that is. Conspiracies to certainties. I kind of go through some things that came to light about Joe Biden that were presented as conspiracies, but then the media, when they decided to be beneficial, agreed that that's what was going on. And just how many times do we have to be lied to by them? And the people that trust them, as long as they're saying what they think is true, start questioning them a little bit. Tariff Truths, a convo with an importer. A friend of mine that's an actual importer from China. We talk about the tariffs and what it meant to his business and what's going on. Return to Babel, the Grand Conspiracy. Again, this is biblical revelation conversation I had, or thoughts about how we are going back, and more people want to be in major cities, and this is a return to Babel, the story of Babel, and ultimately it's being predicted in the Bible as well, as far as how things are going to end. The Pride of Men, and the humility over pride are two episodes I did regarding, we had drag queens. By our elected officials thought it'd be a good idea to have drag queens dancing for children, having the children hand over money. And it's all pride, right? And, we say pride now, and it's like it stands for like people's sexual orientation. But even if like people who pretend to be pastors or whatever are celebrating pride separated from the homosexuality element, who cares? Pride is, if anything's evident from the Bible, it's God hates man's pride. And to see that we're celebrating it should be evident to people what's going on here. Humility over pride talks about a young lady that started a Christian group within the high school and the radical transformations going on in some people's lives. Can AI be moral? Back with the professor, and we're kind of discussing AI and its wickedness inherently and what it's been doing and some negative things that people are experiencing with it. No Nuclear War, Mountain Movers versus Molehill Misfits. That's about the U.S. bombing the Iranian nuclear facilities and just how such a difficult, complicated task that was done with such precision and accuracy that we should all be proud of and ultimately stopped maybe a nuclear weapon from being developed by a hostile nation is being questioned by people that couldn't work their way out of a paper bag, mainly these reporters that don't know anything about nothing. Fork-tongued perverters of speech, power versus truth, just going through people's lives, the fork-tongued perverters of speech, how they twist and distort things in the media and in the politicians. Drag queen fiasco, I go through kind of that drag queen situation in our town and then how it's breaking laws actually, aside from the moral ramifications. Evolution, fact, or primitive religion. That's an episode I go through. Some things that you probably have all learned about in school as being presented as fact, and actually there's no substance to it. It's a religion of how we got here, the origin of life, Darwinian evolution. When you dig into it, there's actually no substance for it. And when you dig in and present actually what the Bible actually says versus what people say it says, it makes way more sense. The Obama and Epstein connection equals CIA. Talk about these Epstein files and the big circus around them and what's going on. Truth is a person, not a thing. The meeting, the giver of life. This is another testimony episode where I met a young man and how we met and amazing transformation that happened in his life. Gerrymandering, the Illinois crackpot calling the Texas kettle black. Talk about these gerrymandering for House seats going on in the country, and they want to harass certain states for redistricting their maps, whereas you have states like California, Illinois, New York, Massachusetts, that based on the representation of the people, the House seats don't match at all. They take whatever they can. We talk about the goofy drone maps in Illinois and how they're doing nothing to represent the people, which is, 45% of the people in the state vote Republican. We don't have 45% of the representatives being Republican. That would be a representative government. The Federal Reserve growing the national debt. Conversation with Rich Goals, who was the guy that did the evidence for the resurrection and became a believer. And we go through kind of the Fed and what it actually is and what it's doing to us. Tale of Two Cities, living in fantasy versus reality. I kind of do a play on it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness from A Tale of Two Cities by Dickens, and kind of relate that to what we're going through now. People are living in two different realities, and their perception of what's going on in the policies is evident because they're not living in an area maybe that is affected negatively by insane policies. Marriage on the Rocks to Marriage on the Rock is my wife and I going through our testimony, our marriage struggles, and how that led to us both becoming believers. For Charlie was an episode I did for Charlie Kirk after his assassination, and I tried doing a different take, not so much talking about it, but what's going on and who do we want to unite with? We want unity in this country, but are we uniting with light and truth, or are we uniting with darkness and lies? We need a new sheriff in town with Brad Sandifer. Brad is running for a Cook County sheriff, and I had the opportunity to interview him. Making Wine in Peace, just an episode on my winemaking hobby and what I've learned from it, learned from creation, learned from grapes, learned from studying nature and how it plays into kind of the biblical view. Halloween mocking death in front yards, I share my theory that that is what's going on when we're seeing these bizarre decorations in front yards of skull and bones and graveyards. It's people trying to make fun of death because they fear it. From Antifa to No Kings, media coordinated protest, I talk about the protests going on and how they're not grassroots, they're not organically organizing, they're actually promoted and funded and supported by the media and the politicians that create the protests so they could point to it as seeking legitimate power. Chicago Flips Red with Zoe Lee. Got to interview her. They're part of an organization. They're getting some steam, and I interviewed our friend also, Danny Carter. That'll be the next episode that I'll get to release after this one, after Thanksgiving. And that's a wrap. I went through them all. If you hear something that was interesting, you want to look back at the show. I'm really excited about the show from a standpoint of, like, I've made a lot of friends through it, and I know a lot of people are hearing things maybe they haven't heard packaged in a certain way that makes sense to them. The show's meant to be shared. The show's meant to spark conversation amongst people that can't talk anymore for whatever reason. It's silly. We need to talk to each other. We need to reason. We need to talk to people we disagree with. We need to think. These are all elements of why I started this show, and I hope you've come to enjoy it, and I appreciate your support. Stay tuned for some new episodes. I got a lot of ideas. Just got to find the time to record them. Peace.
Sing it!
Thanks for joining us for another episode. I hope I got you thinking and out of your comfort zone. Believe me, the biggest fear your government has is a population that is thinking and talking to one another. So get out there, take a risk, start a conversation, make a friend, and reason with each other. Share the show with someone who you think needs to hear it. I wish you peace and love.